Hello, my name is John Brink and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George. An absolute beautiful day in Prince George, and we have an interesting guest in BC forest industry and transition. His name is David Elstone, and David, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much for inviting me here today. Wonderful.
Tell us a little bit about, I've had you on the program before, but just a little bit more about yourself and your background. You were born in British Columbia.
Yeah.
And you got you are an RPF, registered professional forester, and give me a little bit more of your background.
Sure. I went into forestry because I wanted to know what was going on in our industry. I want to know what was going on as a teenager, in terms of what was happening in our environment.
Right.
I was part of the environmental club in my high school, and I thought, one way to get to really know is to be immersed in it, to get to understand what's happening out there.
Right.
And so that was one of my inspirations for going into forestry school, and it's been a great experience.
UBC, or where did you go?
I went to UBC.
UBC,
Yep.
And then so you took your registered professional forester designation there, and then then what did you do after that part?
Well, I graduated in 1994 and worked at various roles in the industry, and it was a tumultuous time in the industry. A lot of transition was happening, just as like it was now.
Just like normal.
I don't think that, to be truthful, our industry is always going through a transition. When are we not changing?
Yeah.
But obviously we're at some pivotal points now. But, I think back then there was, I always look at some of my friends and such, and, back then the advice was work with a company and become the company forester, and you'll, your career is made, and
Right.
You'll be there with the forester. And I kind of got frustrated when I started my career because I wanted to work in certain locations, and I wanted to work for the company, so to speak, and I didn't get those roles for whatever reason.
Right.
And then I was always envious of my friends that were working in these as an area forester as such, and I thought, darn it, they got it so great. And then a few years later, the industry started transitioning and basically externalizing its entire workforce, even the forestry workforce.
Right.
And none of those company foresters that existed
Right.
back in the day are now with those companies anymore. Everyone's changed jobs, worked for this company and that company, worked for
And
themselves.
a lot of names on the buildings changed as well. Consolidation of companies.
Everything it's changed.
Everything, right?
Forestry. The one true thing is trees keep on growing.
Yeah.
But everything else is always in transition, and what we're making, how we're going about doing our relationships with, global trade partners, you name it. Everything's always transition. So you have to be flexible, adaptable.
So that then being said, and you really got into it because you were concerned about the environment and all the things that we did, controversy around it and all the other things. Where did it bring you from that point to now? And I should mention it to our guest, our international guest in a lot of cases, that you are publishing a paper that has become very, very popular, and I urge people to read it. Is under the company name of the Tree Group, correct?
Spar Tree Group.
Spar Tree Group.
Yeah, and I'd love to explain to you why I call it Spar Tree Group.
Yeah.
It's because in old style logging you had spar trees that were meant to be the center of the logging operation.
I'm going to show it to our guest here, so that this is the actual, last one that came out.
That just came out a week or two ago.
Yeah.
So a spar tree is a consulting company.
Yeah.
And when you're standing on top of a spar tree, you have a view of all the operations, and you can see the world differently from everyone on the ground.
Yeah.
So you gather a much different understanding of what's happening, and that's why I call it Spar Tree Group.
And that whole application of the document really is the from the stump, is that it, deals with all those issues from not a 5,000 feet level, but from maybe a 500 feet level, but looking at things in a broader sense, a deeper sense, and making sure. But I found a lot of times, David, is that all the information that we got in a limited way, until you become more knowledgeable about it, you sort out the credible and the not so credible, because there is a lot of information that is not credible for whatever the agenda may be to change it. I believe that you have, captured that, and other people that have done so in presentations that they do is a fellow like Russ Taylor, that is a good friend of ours, and that has been involved in the industry. But the people that are knowledgeable and at the same time providing information that is not partial one way or the other, but simply observing what it is something that's very important, I believe, to the industry in the future of the industry.
Who would thought providing an independent opinion of what you see out there, you can make a business out of? But that's essentially what I did with View from the Stump. And I've been a financial analyst following the forest product sector. I have worked as a lead lobbyist in British Columbia, representing the forest sector, and I worked as a forester. And I could see that there was lots of information available from a very high level, and I found that the supply chain really wasn't getting a great sense of what was happening on the ground. And so I thought, if I wanted to do something like this, which I'm passionate about data and analyzing and trying to interpret what's happening, I don't want to repeat what everyone else is doing. I wanted to create a product that was a ground level perspective of what was happening, so people could be informed and basically run their businesses or run their councils or run their nation, being more well informed of the issues.
Right.
I try to get it right. Try to get the information as accurate as possible, and try to provide some value add, if you want to call it that, to the information that actually exists already out there, just putting it into a package that people can digest and utilize as a tool.
So that then being said, and again, for all the people that are watching us, and there are many of it, even on an international level, that if you want to know what is happening in the BC forest industry, this certainly is a document they should be assigning to. And I think you're putting out about 8 or so.
I do update issues a year, and that's called the View from the Stump. And that's obviously a useful, you're seeing it from the ground level when you're standing on a stump.
How can they sign up to it? But how do they
simply
get a membership?
Well, it's not a membership, but it's a subscription, and you go to my website, either spartreegroup.com or viewfromthestump.com.
Okay, .com.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what can you mention what the cost is?
Well, it depends on who you are.
Okay. So that is not any particular reason, but it's reasonable cost, right?
I have been told I'm undervaluing my product, so given the amount of research and content it goes into it, it's a good deal.
But I would like to see, because I believe it is so critically important that the information that people in general receive has to be reliable and credible, and that's why I made such a big point out of it, that I believe that what you're producing is credible, easy to read, easy to follow, and and I'm even asking you that in our presentation, if you mind that we take some extracts of your publication and attach it to a podcast.
Sure. Obviously, you're doing a great job of promoting my newsletter. I really appreciate it.
Right.
Another reason why I created it is not only just the gap in understanding that's out there. I find that our industry was lacking a counter voice to a lot of the people that are trying to detract from our industry.
I agree.
And for whatever reason, the industry itself has struggled to provide their own voice and get their own voice out there. So I've taken that opportunity to just really point out the facts. We're simple idea that 57 million hectares of this province, which is just over 60% of the province, is forested.
Yeah.
So we're clearly not running out of trees.
No.
Half of that is protected or not going to be logged.
11 million cubic.
There's 11 million hectares of old growth in this province, which is...
Will never be touched.
No, well, that's what we have for left.
Yeah.
And 75% of that, 11 million hectares,
Exactly.
will never be harvested, or it's protected already in some
Right.
sort of thing. I mean, but what I'm trying to say is that we have a working forest of 22 million hectares
Exactly.
of a province that's total size of 95 million hectares. And in that 22 million hectares, we harvest a little tiny bit of that every year.
Yeah.
And we follow conservation type management styles.
Yeah.
We're always evolving. We have good forest management
Nope.
in this province.
Now, the very good point to make, because I believe that as well.
We're not perfect. We always should be evolving. You know, we used to look at deciduous trees as something that was, impacting our timber production.
Right.
I think now there's a big trend to looking at how we can retain a diversified, tree canopy to help our forests be much more biodiverse and offer greater value to nature,
right.
And to wildlife, etc. And I just so that type of information that I try to get out there. It's not complicated, simple, but it contrasts the image that even, for instance, the Premier said the other day in the Vancouver Sun Stuart McNish presentation with the interview with Von Palmer, said that we have poor forest management in this province. And I was just, the Premier doesn't go out there and say we have poor medical practices or poor engineering practices.
Yeah.
I was frustrated when he said we have poor forest management.
Yeah.
We have good forest management in this province. And a sign of good forest management is that we actually adapt.
You see, and that is precisely the point that I'm trying to make in terms of getting credible information to the public, because a lot of times, with all due respect to the Premier, and may they be from the left, the right, or the center, whatever they are, that there is always another agenda that pushes things around. They're getting approached by all kinds of different lobbying groups, but at the end of the day, we have to have the right information. And I agree with you. I do a lot of flying, a lot of flying over this province. I always sit by the window and I always look outside, and I love Canada. I love BC, and I look outside and all I see is trees. And saying, how could it possibly not? We got enough trees. We got lots of trees. Yes, we do, but we do a good job. Since the mid-'80s in particular, where we are regrowing the forest. We can even do better because we are blessed with a land base that will even create a larger yield than we are getting before COVID and before beetle kill and all the other things. And I believe 40, 50, 60 years from now, we will be to the point where we will likely have as much as 90 million cubic meters, and the problem will be no different than it was in Sweden about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, where all of a sudden they had far too much capacity, not enough timber, but it is now just the absolute opposite. They got too much forest, not enough capacity.
I appreciate your passion, and we have a great resource. We've had a lot of challenges. We had the mountain pine beetle. It took out 15 years of harvest.
Spruce beetle.
Spruce beetle.
Douglas fir beetle.
What do you do with that timber? Well, do you just let it stand on the stump and rot and fall over and create a fire hazard? No, our industry tried to harvest that as best as it could in the circumstances of the time, of the thinking of that time.
Correct.
And our knowledge of that time.
Correct.
And we've had to go after that timber to generate economic value to sustain our businesses. Now things are changing. We're coming to the end of the influence of the beetle, and we have other things. And sometimes I get frustrated with what's happening in British Columbia, the discussions and around old growth deferrals and stuff. And not notionally, these are things that we need to do. But it can be frustrating. And one of the things that people our timber supply is being impacted by all these new policies. Well, what I'm excited about is that it's causing discussion. It's causing discussion between you
Dialogue.
and me.
Yeah.
It's causing
First Nations.
First Nations, Indigenous forestry. That was a term that I, as a forester, hadn't even heard about. I understood First Nations in terms of their interests. But Indigenous forestry as a mainstream term really didn't exist 20 years ago in many respects in the industry. Now we're talking about it. There's lots more conversation, and that's where I'm optimistic about the industry, because I see it's going to change.
And we heard that today, and usually I don't necessarily relate to what date it is. It is the 12th or 13th of April, and today tomorrow, and is the annual meeting of the Council of Forest Industry in Prince George, and that is the industry representing largely the BC forest industry. And this is the first time they met again in Prince George. 3 or 4 years ago they met here, and then obviously COVID came and nobody meets then. And now to see this conference today and tomorrow here with over 600 people in attendance, and again hearing the conversations this morning by some of the First Nations presenters, is to see really a changing industry and a changing forest industry in the terms of how we approach it from a community perspective, Indigenous involvement in a changing industry as we go forward. To a certain extent, issues around the primary sector in terms of how do we stay viable, value-added manufacturing, and then at the same time, we're still trying to deal with the issue that we still, as an industry collectively in government involved, that we are trying to balance available fiber to capacity, which has been very difficult for some of the communities. Like if I look north of here, Fort Nelson, Fort St. John, Chetwynd, Mackenzie, Fort St. James, Fraser Lake. Now even our own companies are involved in Houston, where all of a sudden this primary sector is gone, and the secondaries that follow, also what is affected, obviously our pellet plants, and a lot of jobs are being lost that likely will not be replaced again until the midterm. And then what is the midterm, where the timber is back to where we can harvest it, which likely would be 40, 50 years, 60 years, depending how much more effort we put into managing that forest base. And then the question becomes, okay, well, the pain is still not over. Although we have closed down about 45 sawmills, probably 6 or 7 pulp mills, pellet plants, value-added manufacturers, and there probably is still some more to go.
Yeah, for certain. Unfortunately, there is more to come. Definitely our timber supply is adjusting. 10 years ago, the conversation at this conference would have been mountain pine beetle.
Correct.
And all the projections that you've had, Jim Gravan, you've had Russ Taylor here, you've had Rob Schutz.
Yeah.
They made predictions 2010, 2008.
They said what was going to happen,
and they were exactly right.
No question about that.
Today, to look at the future of timber supply is far more complicated. In that not only do you still have the lingering effects of the dominant forest, which is the mountain pine beetle,
right.
We have spruce beetle, we have wildfires, we have mountain caribou,
right.
And we have new forest policy. These things are all contributing. And the harvest in 2022 for this province was less than even 2009. When it was really a dire situation here.
And then we have an industry that has, for all intents and purposes, left the province, where the big 6 or 5 or 6 have moved to other places like the U.S. Southeast or to Europe. And because in the minds of the public companies, they can no longer be profitable, or the operational cost is too high in the region.
That's a great point. I'd like to push back on the perspective. Those companies are still investing in their operations.
Right.
They may not be building new sawmills, but how can you build a new sawmill if you don't have supply?
Correct.
We just talked about the supply declining.
Right.
So these companies have been successful. They have made money.
Yeah.
and they are reinvesting it. They are being economically rational and looking for other opportunities.
Yeah.
So they have, unfortunately, when the timber supply is not economically available, when lumber prices at $350 per 1,000 board feet for 2x4s as of last Friday.
Everybody's underwater.
Everyone's underwater, but the economically available timber supply in British Columbia is challenged.
Yeah.
But if you have a few $100 million in your back pocket, yes, I'm sure if there was a timber here, and they'd be looking at investing in British Columbia.
Right.
But at the same time, some of these companies are so big they just can't go and buy another company. There's competition rules, etc.
Yeah.
So they've had to expand.
Yeah.
And as natural, it's actually from a really global perspective, some of these companies, by diversifying outside of British Columbia, is a very healthy thing.
Right.
Because if you're not diversified, you can't mitigate risk as well. So people like to think about that's a bad thing, and I think it's not. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, and a new reality. And then if you and me sitting here and we have God knows how many millions of dollars to invest elsewhere in the industry, then we say, okay, how much does it cost us for log cost? In the U.S. Southeast, $45. The log at the mill.
They have definitely
US.
a very low log cost.
Yeah, and then we go here and we say, what's the log cost here? Well, it's over $100.
Yeah, but there's a distinct difference. Here we have a supply constraint, and there in the U.S. South they have a supply overabundance.
Correct.
And so that that's it for now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then the species they grow there, as you well know, is southern yellow pine. Most of them are second, third growth already, and they plant them all very well managed, all private owned. It's on the old cotton fields, and they have rotation of about, what do you say, 30, 40 years, maybe maximum?
They're in like the 30 to 40 to 50 year rotation, depending.
Yeah, so depending on the areas that they are.
Yeah.
So, and probably in the last, since 2005, probably at least 20, 25 new mills have been built by Canadian companies, and probably another 40 of them have upgraded, that already were existing, and their capacity in the U.S. Southeast has increased by as much as 7 billion board feet annually, of which they only right now utilizing about half of that. But, but at some point, and that's the logic behind it, if you and me are sitting here, is that we are directors of a large company and have to make choices as to where do we go.
Exactly.
And then at the same time, we're sitting here, we still have access to fiber, about 40 million cubic meters annually, or annual allowable cut here in the province, and we're still trying to adjust all the other different interests, including First Nations, and I'm supportive of that, sharing at about, the objective is about 20% of the annual allowable cut. They do about 10 now, I believe, and then sharing in the revenue. And they're becoming active parts in the forest industry. We see them involved in logging more. We heard that this morning, and they will become involved in manufacturing as well in different areas. And I think all of that is a good thing.
It's a good thing, and it's actually, we often say we're supportive of that, and actually it's not our choice to be supportive of it. It is, we have it's the legislation, that the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Correct. So
it's not even a choice. This is what it is.
Yeah.
And just morally, it should be.
No question.
So I think I recently did an analysis which you were referencing on First Nations control of forest tenure in British Columbia. It's going to grow, even if it doesn't actually the amount of tenure they have. The First Nations is collectively. I mean, every First Nation is different.
Yeah.
But the influence of the Indigenous peoples in British Columbia is growing rapidly and very meaningfully.
Yeah.
Almost constantly. And I think that if you don't have a relationship with a First Nations community, you're really going to have to really look hard at your supply chain.
Yeah, And there is no question about that. And then, especially for people that have operated in the region, already have a good relationship with them in most cases. Like for ourselves, I came here in 1965 and then became a general manager of a sawmill. The employees in the sawmill, 1967. I barely spoke the language. I could, and there I was a general manager of a sawmill. And of all places, Watson Lake, Yukon.
Yeah.
All of our employees, save and except one, were all First Nations. The Sawyer was not, and so it always for us has been, very important to work with the First Nations, and we have operations in Houston. One in Vanderhoof, and then the one in Prince George. Our objective has always been 1/3 female, 1/3 male, and 1/3 of the other designations, including First Nations. And and so I see that as a good direction that we are going. The key to the industry here will be, as we have the confidence again, and that will come back, of investing by the major players in particular. Obviously at $350 a thousand, everybody's underwater. Nobody's going to invest until there is some daylight that we get back to at least making some money, then looking at investing. And I'm trying to look forward a little bit between you and me.
So markets we can't control.
No.
Right? 300, even with the supply dynamics we have today, with all the, I think we're going to drop by 15%, possibly, given the announcements in Q1 in British Columbia, timber or lumber production will be down to 6 billion board feet.
Yeah.
The market's not responding. It's a demand-driven market at the moment, and the demand is not there. It's like 2009. We can in theory close all the mills. The matter wouldn't matter. Demand is just so weak at the moment that the market's not reacting. But how do we look forward? Like you say, where do we go? And we can only control what we control. We can't control the markets, but we can control our costs, and we can control the environment we're working in. Right now we have an environment where there's forest policies being introduced, but there are a lot of gaps. And we want value added, but where are we going to get the supply for your mill? We've talked about this before, you and I. Where are we going to get that supply when most of the supply is already allocated? Theory, right? Where are we going to get that? We want a lot of different things from our forest, but we just haven't connected all the dots. So today I actually presented at the Kofi's convention, and I proposed the idea. Well, what's really needed is an economic strategy or a plan that starts addressing some of the gaps, and also starts creating regional strategies with our partners, First Nations.
Right. So I wanted to be there for your presentation, but I
just gave it to you.
I wanted to listen to it. So, okay, let's walk a little bit forward on that then. Is what do we do? Again, you and me sitting here and saying, so what do you want us to do? Well, let's first and foremost establish one thing for sure. There is no better country than Canada in the world. There is no better country. There is no better province than the province of British Columbia. No question about it. In terms of forest, there is no place that I know of, and I've been all over the world, worked in Sweden, worked in Europe, and I've been 68 years. I started working when I was 14, became a furniture maker, so I'm 82 and a half now, so 68 and a half years in the industry, hands-on, and then everything in all the different places. Sweden, very similar to us in a way in terms of what we are growing, in terms of fiber, and all of that we have here. How can we get better yield from the forest? Already be doing an excellent job on forestry, but we can do more in terms of intensive forestry, that we can accelerate the growth and a bit further to where, and shorten the cycle a bit more, and probably get to the level of 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, we will grow 90 million cubic meters. In my opinion, no question about that. Then being said, that's a given. It should not be subject to politics and saying the gun government said no and the other one said, that has to stop. for one, and we control that. First Nations hopefully will be, and I'm convinced they will be, very much part of that particular policy. That's what communities have to become more involved. Like what Simon said today, and a lot of the other communities, they say, how about us? They should be more involved because they have a voice as well. And they are not vocal, I say that constructively, not negatively. They have to become more involved. Then the other part of what should it look like as we go forward, the makeup. Well, one of the issues that I've said is that, that the fiber that we manufacture here, and a lot of times the quality of fiber, I was always amazed to look at the quality. There is no quality like it in North America, like we grow it here in the interior. I'm not talking about cedar now or duck fir, but for a building. We can do more with that in terms of adding. We should not turn it into spaghetti, I make 2x4, 2x6, 2x8, 2x10, 8 and 12, and I want to ship it down there if we want it or not. And we go like this, up and down. I always remember when I initially was working in Holland for the largest importer in Western Europe, William Pond. I was in one of their auditing and troubleshooting divisions, and because my dad managed a small company for them as well, so I had a little bit of the inside track, but I was very good at what I was doing, even at a very young age. So when I was about 20 years old then, I started to work for them in the auditing troubleshooting department. They had about 32 facilities throughout Holland, and anytime there were operational problems, they sent in the troubleshooting team. The things that were interesting then, and we were liberated by the Canadians. I was born during the Second World War on April the 12th, 1945, and I was so impressed by it that I always knew that one day I would go to Canada, to the land of my heroes. So Canada to me was very important. But to come back to the story is that every so often when I was working in that position at William Pond, or the large company, Canadian groups would come down from British Columbia, and they would have a visit, and it was beautiful. All the Canadians were there. I attended quite a few of the meetings when they were there, and what did they want to do? They want to sell dimension lumber to the Europeans because they wanted us to build houses like they do here. That doesn't work because it will never change. Mm-hmm. It is no different today. I still see delegations of the industry. BC Lumber Trade Council comes to mind, financed by the federal government, provincial government, and they go to China and they go to India and they go all over the place, and they want to sell them our lumber. And we say, hoorah, hoorah, we selling lots of lumber. Mm-hmm. Well, the lumber they're selling to China, starting in 2005, 95%, if not more than that, is all low-grade lumber that used to be remanufactured into other products here. Mm-hmm. Who pay them more than the Chinese would. One of the reasons that why don't we have more further manufacturing is that we have to stimulate investment in value-added manufacturing. There's not many companies left now in value-added manufacturing. North of Hope, and the Prince George, in the northern BC, I used to be the Association of Value-Added Manufacturers here in the Prince George region. We used to have between 40 and 45 companies, members. We tried to get up to 50. You know how many are left today? 3.
Wow.
Of those 3, 2 will be gone in the next 2 years, or already shut down. And I'm not sure if there will be any left, because why would there? And so if we, and I kind of go back now to where do we go from here? And I always believe, and at the presentations that I've made, even to government, in terms of the intentions paper, and I was one of the persons to speak as industry, I don't know why they chose me, because nobody else wanted to probably, is saying that the future of the industry is to have innovative primary. What does it mean, John? Innovative primary to means the mills are smaller, more focused on the profile of the timber. They will have more technology, electronic technology, robotics, and all the other things. And here comes the operative. And they will employ much less people than they even do today.
Yes.
That's where the future is. In combination with intensive secondary, what does that mean? Well, that means to me that of the lumber that is manufactured 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now, that 50% of the lumber that is manufactured will go up the value chain. 25% of the lower grades, 25% of the higher grades. That's how I see it, and that's where the employment will be. That's where the value will be added, and that's where First Nations become involved, and all the other things.
Here's the big picture perspective, John, is that we have an intentions paper. We have this goal of creating value and more jobs from our trees that we harvest. But what does that mean? And I can't tell you you're wrong or you're right with what you're talking about in terms of a goal, but at least you have a goal. You have this is where you would like to see this industry go, and I think that's important because now we can have a discussion. Is that realistic? We could take the data, we can look at where our gaps are, we can try to understand how we could get to achieve yours. Maybe after doing some analysis, we could have said, well, maybe even 100% value add. Who knows?
Yeah.
But my point is that we don't have a goalpost. We don't have the direction where things could go. How can the industry shift? How can First Nations buy into a manufacturing process if we don't know the direction of our industry?
And I agree with that, David. All I can say is by example, I started a company here nearly 50 years ago with nothing, really, $25,000 from the bank, 3 employees, and a new concept of developing a product. And I gradually did that. 50 years later, we're still there. We employ 400 people if all things are normal. We have an operation in Prince George, one in Vanderhoof, one in Houston. We wanted to double in size, We've never had a nickel handout of subsidies. We have no tenure. We buy the lumber on the open market in spite of it, not because of it. So what are what are you suggesting is, John, I say, is in the intentions paper, but I say, how do we attract investment in the value-added manufacturing sector? We have to then have reasonable expectation of access to fiber to attract, not tenure, just reasonable expectation of access to fiber. Okay, why is that not happening today then? Well, the lumber that is still being sent, if you and me walked over to our plant, about a stone throw away, we still have a reman plant sitting there that used to employ 150 people for 30 years. That has been shut down since 2005. We got notice, about 60 days notice, and saying, okay, there's no more low grade available because it's all going to China. Are they paying more for it? No, they're paying less. Why? Because the industry doesn't want low-grade lumber to be sold in the province that then can compete with them in the marketplace in China. So they automatically add a premium to that. What is the other deterrent? The other deterrent is that softwood lumber duties, and I was very involved in the negotiations from Lumber One from the 80s forward with the US, and we're able to somehow negotiate a deal where duties would be paid on they should not be paid for secondary manufacturers at all because they have no tenure or no handouts. But that then being said, the best we could do is pay duties on the input value. So if it costs you $100 for low grade, low grade cycle, whatever it is, it should not be paid on the value added to it. So a product that you buy for $100, after you put labor and all the other things, and you sell it for $500, the duty should be, if there is a duty, it should be paid on the. That part was totally eliminated by the last go around on softwood lumber. What does it mean? is that, again, it adds another element. That's what I call the low-hanging fruit. What deters people from investing in value added?
The softwood lumber file is it's a complicated discussion, as you know, and that it often gets used as well. We can't do what we want to do because how does it fit into the softwood lumber, discussions? But at the same time, it is a very big issue. There are billions of dollars at stake. There's an industry at stake, and we, as much as we like to just say, screw it, ignore the issues. I mean, British Columbia, if we don't change where we're going, we're not going to be the biggest lumber producer in Canada or in North America, or we're going to be much smaller. We'll be much smaller, and be, maybe Quebec will be the biggest producer. But my point is as much as we'd like to just work independently of the concerns about the softwood lumber trade, it exists. There's a whole nation just south of the border that wants to control how we manage and do what we do here. It's extremely frustrating, but there's people have made careers as lawyers fighting this dispute, and it's an industry unto itself.
Good example would be, David, is that, and since we are on that topic, not over belaboring it, but we had President Biden and Premier or the President Trudeau meeting here. When was it? 2 weeks ago?
Middle of a few weeks ago. Yes.
The issue of softwood lumber did not even come up. I mean, it was not even mentioned. and so since 2017, the industry collectively have spent close to $8 or $9 billion on money that is sitting there because the BC Lumber Coalition, and some of our friends that have invested there are close to them, but the list finally became out. It includes international paper and on. I can read you out the list. So they're the ones that are. It has nothing to do with all the things that people say BCT has been needed because otherwise they. No, nothing to do with that. It's all bullshit. I'm being again very frank about it.
I think you worked up.
Let's make sure that if we can stop the wood from coming in, or we make their cost higher, that gives us the opportunity to get more. So it's mainly so those are the underlying issues about it. But that all being said, coming back to value added, because of that issue alone. The secondary manufacturing sector, like us, for instance, we have paid something like $65 million in duties since 2017. So saying, well, why can we not attract people to invest in the value-added sector? Well, but I've said that unless and until there is reasonable expectation of access to fiber at economically viable prices, not being penalized for everything all around the world, then we will not attract investments in value-added manufacturing. And that is one of the critical areas, in my opinion. So what I kind of look forward to is innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary. They must work together, and they must say, without that, unless we work together, then the industry will be constantly in turmoil. Add to that, the Indigenous community that wants to be a party to that in a meaningful way as well, and that's the way it has to look like. So, I'm optimistic about where we are going, and in dialogue like between you and me are very important.
Well, that's what I think is like I say, some of the directions we're going in this province are frustrating, but it sparked discussion.
Exactly.
It sparked. We've never had such although I can't say we've made a lot of progress, but I think there's so many more voices and interests coming out now.
And that makes the difference.
And coming out of the proverbial, hate to say it, woodwork, but we have so many more voices coming out and putting out thoughts and ideas and concerns now than we've ever had, and that's going to reach a critical point. Maybe we'll see something happen and some announcements at Kofi. We don't know. When the Premier speaks tomorrow, the Minister speaks in an hour from when we end our call here. But I'm not saying there's going to be, but we're going to read a crescendo where this discussion turns into more action.
You're going to make sure that you do this, and you do it in the way you do it, that provides information, credible information, to all those that wish to know. And I think it's important for me to make sure that I mention this, because I think it's such an important set of information that clears up a lot of stuff. At the same time, I want to make sure, and whatever I do, that that my podcast and the BC Forest Industry and Transition, although some people get annoyed by it, likely, we have lots of people watching it. Like the last one was Bob Schutz. I think we had 500,000.
Wow, I got to get up to that. I'm jealous. I'm envious. But that's the great thing. That's my point, is that now you're having these podcasts. Other people do their podcasts. We may not all disagree, but the more we get discussion going, the more likely we can move the dial.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I want to make sure of, and you feel the same, and it's fairly obvious from our discussion, is that the future, the midterm is going to be a challenge. In the short term, there is still some more pain to be had. There is still too much capacity. I did a keynote presentation at Telqua a couple of weeks ago, to the economic development group there in that whole region. And, it was obvious that there is still too much capacity there, not enough volume. And probably, that's probably one of the issues that a company like Canfor is struggling with, with the Houston mills. Should they rebuild it or not rebuild it? And I know they're going through that session, and they, at some point, will bring it to their board, and then they will make the decision as to what they do. But the fact remains that there likely is still too much capacity on the west side, and that in the meantime, some of those logs will flow into the areas like potentially Vanderhoof, Fraser Lake, and all the other places. There is only so much to go around, right?
Nothing stays the same forever.
Yeah. So that all then being said, how do you see it, so far, going forward?
I don't disagree. I think this year is going to be an awful year. We both have the markets. They're just not great, as we've talked about. I'm hoping the government listens to some of what I'm saying, what you're saying, and realizes they need more. They need to really start thinking about the industry not on a short-term basis. We need plans that last, to 2030, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
They don't have to be written in stone, and they should be developed collaboratively.
Right.
But if we don't have a plan, we're never you don't know where you're going to go.
Right.
So I think that I'm hoping that, these guys will get the message eventually, and maybe put ahead, populist concerns, move beyond populist concerns into what is really best for communities and for the for the sector. I don't want to say, when we say industry, there's connotations, but for the sector, I can't disagree. We have a great forest, ample amount of forests. We don't obviously harvest and all that. We need to figure out how to, the forests that we've traditionally worked in need to be, invested in, and really accelerate what could be tap into the potential that could come from those areas.
Right. And then the question that I get asked a lot of times by people that I deal with, that saying that that half a dozen companies control probably 75% of the annual algal cut in the province of British Columbia, and most of them have most of their operations, in some cases 2/3 of their operations, in other places, and that becomes an issue, especially as we relate to communities like, like again, as I said earlier, Chetwynd, Mackenzie, Prince George to a certain extent, that we have to get to the point where we can be globally competitive. But the danger now is, David, is that the stumpage rates have come down. If the price doesn't go up, or if it remains around I would say the break even, depending on the different mills, but it's still probably about $200 below, the break even point in most cases. And unless it goes up higher, mills will not look at further investment until that happens. And then, then the mills will have to look different, and then communities have to be more involved, because we are so uniquely different from others that, the timber in the province of British Columbia is owned by us, the people of the province, and that means with that go certain social obligations, and that is always a very delicate balance, that we have to be aware of.
Well, that's why we're having the conversations.
That's exactly why we're having it.
So I am optimistic that, we're still going to have a sector. It's just what it's going to look like in the future.
But we are both optimistic that it will be a good one. You're going to do what you do well. And again, I say, get it, guys. This is the document. And then at the same time, we have to go back to the conference. And, I very much enjoyed, as always, our discussion. And thank you for having it.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.